Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I love that Tshimong Talks is a 1 p.m. thing because my caption is always, "What are you doing for lunch? Join us for a Tshimong Talk." Today is a very special one because it is still Youth Month, and I'm very excited that I'm with Thami today. So we're both hosting. We're still young people.
Yes, we still qualify for positions.
Right? And importantly, we're also hosting Tshimong alumni who represent even younger youth. We call them very young youth. I'm sure they'll disagree. But they're going to come on the platform today, and we're really going to give them the space to reflect with us, to engage with us, because when we were thinking about June 16, Thami, I think it took us back to the very roots of this organization, because this is a youth development organization, and we went back and thought about why did we do this. We were very young ourselves. We were 21 when we started, and I think there was extramural, gained this new resonance where we simply wanted to go to schools after school and teach debating. That's it. And for us, it was such a crucial thing, and we could hardly say exactly why it was as important as it was, but certainly what it did is create and show talent in a new way that very few activities can claim, that they can do the same.
Yeah.
And I think the two people that we have in the call today, Munaka Munyai and Stembiso Mathenjwa, are two stunning examples of what that means. And so as we've evolved, even as an organization, to have a bigger mandate where we are thinking about this conversation from a social change point of view, from an education point of view, I think these two young people have journeyed with us and are a very good example and representation of what's possible to achieve with debating. And so before we get into a bit more, content around this, I think it's important to get to know them and to make sure that everyone who's joining in and everyone who's going to be watching this talk on social media and listening to it rather on streaming platforms knows exactly who we're talking to. So let's start with Munaka. Who are you, Munaka? Where do you come from? What shaped you? What influenced you even before we come to know each other? 'Cause I think we know you quite well now, but what are some of those stories that we'd be surprised to hear about you?
Hi. So I think there's a few stories you'd be surprised to know about me. Firstly, I'm a comedian in my spare time. I'm kidding. But
this is fun.
just to start it off, I think Munaka Munyai, I'm from Polokwane. I live in Polokwane. I studied in Polokwane, but I'm originally from Benda. I moved here officially when 2010, so like World Cup time. It's having a lot of fun. There was Peter Mkaba Stadium that was recently built. And so my background, or like a lot of my story just has to do with education. I was a teacher's baby. I spent most of my time in school. And so I love a lot of the teachers that I've passed through. They were fantastic role models for me. They are the reason I believe in a lot of my potential. They are the people that literally presented me to a lot of groundbreaking opportunities that I can definitely say even introduced me to Tshimong. So that's my I guess a shell of my childhood. And then another story you'd be surprised to hear about me is that I fell into debating by mistake. So I am
fell into it.
I literally just fell into it. I am not like your debater, the technical ones. I'm not with Stembiso. So that'll be like case one, case two. I kind of fell into debating because in primary, I was really into like storytelling and public speaking. That's what I was super passionate about.
Right.
So like the dramatic side of things, right? And debating is a lot more like it's more of a technical sport. But teachers always like funneling me that side when a speaker couldn't show up or something, because they knew that was just like not my niche. And then I come to high school, and obviously it's not primary. They're like, we don't do that consistently, so you need to find something else, And then I joined debating. And typical of my personality, I learned all of the rules, like word for word, had a template that I had to follow. So I was a terrible speaker, because even when I was saying complete nonsense, I'd be like, and we win today's debate.
Yes.
That's part of the speaking template that you're taught, right? When you get coached.
Therefore.
But eventually we grew into it, got a little bit better, got introduced to Tshimong, finally saw the value of just debating and community building that comes out of that. And I'm really, really grateful for opportunities such as those ones. But it's a little bit about Munaka.
That's awesome. That's just so awesome. I think just recalling you were you a third speaker.
Yeah.
Right? Shouting, we win. And going into that conclusion. And we'll talk a bit about that. But I just love the fact that you've been shaped by your teachers, because you didn't mention, but Munaka is a UCT student. She's in her final year of her honors degree, and next year she's going into a PGCE, and is actually part of the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. Can you tell us a bit about that before I go to Sthembiso?
All right. So I am at UCT. I'm studying English and history. Those are my majors, and I have minors in African political economy. And so, that's just a bit about me. I'm a humanities baby through and through. I love the essays. I'm not too sure about the reading, but I love the essays. And so, I'm at UCT, and then I'm also a Jakes Gerwel Fellowship candidate fellow. That's a big mouthful, but JGF or Jakes Gerwel Fellowship is essentially at the forefront of finding teachers that are here to transform the education system in South Africa. That's them in a nutshell. I've been a candidate fellow there for about 3 years. I'm a year C, so they call us. But next year I'm a year D, which is dinosaur. I'm getting old. But what that kind of like entails, or what that journey. Perfect. But what that journey has entailed is just like exposing us to multiple facets of what education, or where education can be transformed. So it's not the fixed, you are stuck in a classroom. There's 3 parts of impact. So you're either a social entrepreneur, like what Tshimong Academy is doing, which I'm extremely excited to be a part of, or you are an educational leader. So those ministers of education are being built now. They're not just going to fall into the position or fall from the sky. We're building them now. Or you are an expert teacher. And that's something that I'm super passionate about, because I love lesson planning. I love highlighters. I love bugging kids and embarrassing them and asking them to dance. So there's different parts of impact. But essentially what they want to do is transform education, or be at the front of dealing with the most pressing education issues in South Africa right now. And I've been there for 3 years and I enjoy it a lot. So that's why I'm studying PGCE.
Yeah. Excellent. And very much not a surprising thing for you to be doing, because I think you know yourself so well, and you've perfectly described who you are. Stembiso, it comes to you. A lot of people know you as Robert, and we affectionately call you Ste. But can you tell us about who you are and how you see yourself?
Stembiso Robert Mathenjwa is a medical student and someone who likes investing in things that create social change. So I was raised in a really interesting way. So I was, I live in the township, place called Otalu here in Durban, and my mom didn't allow us to go outside at all. So throughout all of my life, up until I was a teenager, it was me sitting in front of a TV, couldn't even go to my own yard. I just had to stay at home. So it was either the TV or whatever homework I had to do. That was me at home. And then I guess things kind of started changing when I became a teenager and I went to high school. And then things started making a little less sense than they did before. So I would go and I would see a very specific lifestyle on TV. And then I would leave the house, look at all of the houses around me or everyone around me and go, this isn't what I saw on TV.
Yeah.
Go to school. And then the people in school, I went to a previously designated Indian school. So a lot of the people there were also living very like different and arguably much better lifestyles. And it got even worse when I got to high school because when you get to your essay debatings and you get to your KZN debatings, you have to go to people's houses and the training's happening at someone's house.
Sure.
Right.
And now
right.
you're looking at this like massive mansion in Santon and you're like, okay, this is not like, it's not where I'm from. This is not what I'm seeing where I'm from. So a lot of that kind of made me go, okay, there's clearly a problem here. And I don't see anybody else talking about it. I don't see anybody else doing a lot for it. So I'm going to put myself in a space to kind of do something about it. And I guess that's where everything kind of came from. As far as debating goes, I think it's just always something I was pushed into from primary school. I had a teacher who was like, you should do it. And I did it and I enjoyed it. But it was one of those by the way things. It wasn't really something that I ever took seriously. I think I was in grade 7. So what they generally do is that the high schools around my area, they usually come in, they campaign in the primary schools to get people to go to the high schools. So I was in grade 7 and someone who you guys obviously know, Sia, Siyabonga Mjali, came through with Mount View and Mpile, who was the teacher at the time, and they were campaigning. And he was there and they were like, look, you know, he is the RCL chairperson. He's a South African debating trialist. These are the kind of people who were modeling in our school. And I remember just seeing him and I was like, yo, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that much better, you know? Yeah. And
I like that.
Obviously
That competitive
became one of
energy
my best
from
friends
early.
in life. And that kind of started my journey for high school debating and where I am now. Yeah.
I think Thami resonates a lot with that, actually. I'm glad he even moved a bit back in this chair. There's some of the stuff I've heard about you, Thami, and how you become chairman of RCL. Just that culture of modeling behavior. But before we even do that, there's people that we meet and we're hugely inspired by them and we want to be like them, only a little bit better. And I think that was a big motivation for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things that I seriously resonate with. I mean, I resonate with both Munaka and Stembiso. I want to hop on the first point that Stembiso made around inequality and kind of being confronted by inequality from a very early age. I tell the story all the time. Busi knows this very well. You know, I grew up in the Vaal Triangle. So this is the south of Johannesburg, right? And I grew up to, I think, one of the more wealthier families in the township of Sebokeng. But I oscillated between two places because my dad's side of the family was in the suburban part of Vereeniging, Arkon Park, and my mom's side of the family was in Sebokeng, a far less developed township than like Soweto, Kagiso, many of the established townships in Gauteng. And so, you know, it's the little things that I experienced, man, because I had friends on both sides. You know, the fact that, for example, I realized by the time I was 9, every one of my friends from Sebokeng had lost their mothers and didn't know their fathers, right? And I was the only guy in the friend group that had both parents, for example. Besides all the other privileges that I had access to by virtue of, you know, Model C schools and all those kinds of things, I think I grew up being very aware of the deep inequality that exists in our society. And for example, I do little funny things where I'd go back to Arkon Park Primary School, which is where I went to school. Very different from where my friends went to school. but we played different sporting activities and sporting codes there that weren't necessarily available kokas. I'd bring those sports back, so I'd get guys kokas to play cricket, for example. That's something you're doing as a kid, like 8, 9, 10, right? But perhaps that's already the beginnings of empathy and finding yourself as someone that's bridging an inequality gap. So I've always resonated with that, seeing myself as someone who's here to bridge an inequality gap.
Sure.
Because the surroundings that I'm in, are very different to the other surroundings that I'm in.
Yeah.
So I really resonate with that, and debating was so important for that, from my perspective later.
On that specific point, and I think that's a good segue to the really the big question that we want to talk to Sthembiso and Munaka about. A lot of people that go into the space of debating, because it is a very difficult extra-curricular activity to do when you're in high school. Some of the people that are going to be watching this talk are in grade 10, 11, 12, have started out or a bit more advanced in their journey. And for some people, it becomes this safe haven where they can enjoy critical thought and discourse, and they can grow. But it's also fun because they get to compete, they get to go to different contexts and meet different people. So it's really immersive in that way. I want to talk to you guys about your entry into the competitive debate space, how you also emerge in that space and become exceptional at what you do. But importantly, how this thing becomes more than just an extracurricular activity that's fun, where you meet people and compete on a Saturday. How does this begin to be more for you? And how would you contextualize those experiences for someone who's a competitive debater right now, whether in schools or universities, who maybe isn't transitioning to a higher view of the sport?
Yeah.
Sthembiso, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think it was really, and maybe we'll get into this a bit later, but it was relatively easy for me to get into to seeing the value of debating, simply because of where I was coming from and the kind of topics we were talking about, because it really was like, I can't have a conversation about marginalized Black people as if it's just an intellectual exercise, because I know them, I am them, I live with them, I live around them. So that was one thing that made it easy. But I think for me, and so starting off, again, because of the social inequalities and the disparities that exist, didn't have a lot of resources to get good at debating. And I would see, like, with a lot of my other peers, they were doing better. I was a reserve for the KZN team in my first year. So at that point in time, that's when I had to take things a step further for myself and have to do a lot of the work for myself. I remember Sia and I used to technically break into schools on Saturday so we can go do debating. We would take our teacher's key, go in on a Saturday, use the Wi-Fi, watch videos, try to get handbooks from other people and just do all of that work. And eventually it paid off for the both of us, and I thought that was great. But also, I did reach a point in time where it kind of felt like, okay, I've done just about everything that I possibly can do competitively. And that's when I was like, okay.
You don't mention what these things are.
He
doesn't mention what these things
just indulge us there, Chief. What are these things?
What are these things that you
By then, I think I had, by the end of high school, I think I'd been on the South African team for 3 consecutive years. Yeah, for 3 consecutive years. I had, I think I'd ranked top 10 in South Africa for every nationals that I'd been to. What else? Of course, won NNPC. What else? Hey,
Hey, come on.
World's
Ranking and worlds.
Oh yeah, worlds. Yeah, no,
How could
yeah.
you, bro?
Oh yeah. My first year at Worlds was top 25, and then I was top 20 at my final year at Worlds. So
yeah. So for the audience, this is the World Schools Debate Championships. So countries all over the world, schools all over the world, children all over the world who are eligible to debate in this competition. He was in the top 25 in his first year, right? So let me tell you, it's not 30 people there. It's not 30 people.
Yeah, it's not 30 people. And it's not 30 any other people, even if it were 30 people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, from there, I was like, let me try hosting tournaments.
Yes, I remember that.
That went relatively well. But I was still like, this is still very much existing in a confined debating kind of space and not really doing anything more than that. So in 2018, and I know we're going to speak about this a bit later, but got the experience to go to the Nelson Mandela Debating Challenge. And that's when I was like, okay, there's really more to this, and there's different places where it can be applied. From there, I started doing the work of putting together mentorship programs, started my own NPO, just started trying to find ways to apply the skill that I'd already acquired for like years before then. So for me, it was being a space of seeing how it can be transformational. That's how I was able to translate it.
Yeah. Busi, maybe just give some context about the national debate, the Nelson Mandela Debate Championship, because that's also where we met both Munaka and Stembiso.
Exactly, I was going to say. And there's some analysis Munaka gave specifically on what that tournament was when she did her little cameo appearance in the documentary. Yeah. But that's tournament, and I hate to even call it a tournament. It was a leadership program. Was probably one of the most special experiences I think we've even had as founders.
Absolutely.
In 2018, the year of Nelson Mandela's centenary, we were very, very fortunate that the Nelson Mandela Foundation essentially gave us space to run their youth programming via the launch of the Nelson Mandela Debating Challenge, which then invited 5 high potential speakers from each province in the country to convene in Gauteng and to have a 7-day leadership experience that also required them to debate. And it was incredibly challenging, not just for them, but I think for us as well, because we had to decide how deep that program would be in terms of what we would engage. So we were getting you guys to debate peace versus justice. Like, did you want the land or did you want a constitution that protects your human rights? And it sounds like an easy choice to make when you don't understand the history and what we were on the precipice of in terms of the MK and the tense political situation internally in the country, and just how dangerous the situation was, not only for the leaders at that time, but for all of us. Our futures collectively were on the table, and just notions of passing the baton forward to this generation. And we'll talk about that because we want to talk about politics with you guys and how debating has helped you understand and how to be empowered as a political agent in society. But I think just broadly, NMDC was the girl, the arena where we get to meet both of you and where you are shaped by the program, but you shaped the program as well, shaped us. And what ended up becoming our mission. Thami, I don't know if you'd add to that before Munaka kind of goes into her experiences with competitive debating.
Yeah, I mean, what that was that it was an experiment. We were trying to position debating as a leadership and nation building tool. What does it look like if debaters speak about issues of national concern on a platform that gives them the opportunity to move the nation forward? What does it feel like for them to dress themselves as nation builders? So to dress yourself as Mandela the activist in the apartheid era. What does it mean and what does it feel like to dress yourself as Mandela the governor and debate issues of public policy post 94 or on the way to the democratic dispensation, and debating, just dressing yourself up as a philanthropist, right? In a world where poverty and inequality is still so stark and public policy isn't enough to bridge these gaps. What can you do when you raise money? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's debating is simulations. And I think we were just taking advantage of these motions that essentially put people in simulated environments. But we were doing that by actually taking young people to those spaces. And Tshimong has since always been about that. It's always been about young people seeing themselves as advocates for people and not just competitive debaters.
I'll tell the audience something. This podcast needs a buzzer. This podcast needs a buzzer because that, the simulation, dressing. But Munaka,
I got that from Bongani, by the way. Shout out Bongani, my man.
Bongani. I don't have a buzzer again. If I had a buzzer. Munaka, how was your journey? Was it as poetic?
As a poet.
Absolutely not. My journey was not as poetic. which is hilarious because I'm the poetess. Thanks a lot, Stembiso, but it's fine. Like my journey, right? Like I said, I was into oration and I was into storytelling. I was into drama. And so that just kind of like obviously had to be funneled into debating. I had to find a way to use that outlet now for oration. And like I said, typical of my personality, learned all of the rules to the extent that like we were watching videos of Stembiso at Nats, our like practices. No, sorry, not at Nats. Let me respect the man at Worlds. They're on YouTube. You're like, these are the people, and you go to nationals. I think we went in 2017, the next year around, and we were being shown like we had seen during our practices videos of like your Danleys, your William Shokis, your Stembisos. They're like, this is how these people speak. They rehearse like mad, and they practice all the time. They live, eat, breathe debating. So now you're like, oh my gosh, how do I become that? And like similar, just like having the same background as Sthembiso, sort of like, how do I access like this sort of quality material that these kids are obviously like predisposed to? The reality is just that you're going to someone's house and you're hogging their Wi-Fi. You're watching YouTube videos, you're reading manuals. Some of these manuals were created by your Danleys, by your William Shokis. You're like literally exhausting all resources possible because you're obsessed with becoming the best debater. And instead of realizing that it's a transformative process that is literally happening, you are becoming a critical thinker, you're becoming a collaborator, you're becoming a really good communicator and even a leader. Because, and I recall this specifically in our school, it was such a thing that you were a debater that we were literally excluded for it. And that's because we were able to articulate ourselves in a way that other students could not. And we literally...
Excluded, how do you mean? Like socially?
Yeah, not even necessarily socially, but kind of like by teachers just saying things like, oh, here go the debaters again. And like, why are we in an education space that is not encouraging that sort of thinking, that is not encouraging of people just taking advantage of the fact that outside of the small 8 hours that I spend in a day, I'm interested in exploring other topics and broadening my mind. I'm interested in developing myself and my success as a student holistically, just outside of my academics. But it was a huge issue when I got to high school, but that was in the later parts. The earlier parts was super rosy and romantic. I was not as competitive as Che. I was just happy to be at the tournaments and get the pie and snacks afterwards. I was like super excited about the food. I loved my team. I was also just someone who was excited to know that Limpopo debating, I was really strategically placed in Limpopo debating at a time when it started to bloom. And that was because before it was close to impossible to get a tournament together. And I don't know if he's on this call, but shout out to Mr. Mashiti Show. But like, so Mr. Mash, we call him, was incredible.
Absolutely.
He is a change maker for doing that because in essence, before our time, right, you would have like one PDL a year, probably 2 maximum. Getting to nationals was a different story. Like getting to go to compete with other like regions or provinces was nearly close to impossible. So by the time that we're arriving, things have been built up, momentum and trajectory has been set for us. We just need to get in there and immerse ourselves in that process and take advantage of it. And we did. And I think that was the first time debating kind of came to life for me, as outside of writing my little template of we won. I was interested in, okay, how do we win? How do we think like winners? And more importantly, what do we take from this process?
Like winners.
Like what do we take from this process, right? And then later on in my career, as I'm moving towards grade 10, grade 11, I start seeing the potential of opportunities, and this mostly comes from Nelson Mandela debating challenge, because now I'm like, okay, Busi and Thami people are important. There's scholarships, there's this, and that. How do I tap into that? Like, how do I use an extra curricular activity I've just been enjoying to tap into some opportunities? And I think that's the other thing that debating kind of did. It sort of like cemented itself in my life as a central thing that I could use to tap into other peripheries. So of course I'm interested in storytelling. Of course I'm interested in articulating myself and, in just making sure I get all my distinctions. But all of that, I realized after I leave debating, because I think I stopped doing debating when I got to matric. After I leave debating, that a lot of those resources and a lot of those very crucial, informative elements of what I was doing were literally tied to what I was doing in debating. So now that I'm out of the space, I'm not necessarily finding it a little bit more difficult, but I'm realizing how distinguishing it was to be in that space, to be invested in that space, and how beneficial it was for me. And so that was me. My major achievement was that at provincials, and Busi was there, so she can attest to it. I won best speaker. Thank you so much. But that was for the APSA Tshimong debating competition. That was like a later tournament. But like and then in terms, it was a big deal. So it's like I still have the trophy here. Don't mind me. I buff it every day. But I think in terms of like the transformation of debating that kind of happened for me, the first start of it is similar to Robert, when I just realized that like there's something here that is making me an agent of change. Not because I'm smarter than everyone else, but because I'm being given the opportunities to articulate myself in a way other people are not, right? And so for me, that transformation was more personal. It became about processes only later in my life. Like right now in my university career, I am a processes person. But before, it was a more personal transformation. Like, who am I? What do I want? Why is that important? And how do I leverage that in my community, in my family also, to create the sort of change that I would like to see in society? And so, that's kind of my journey with debating, but it really became transformative, and I really fell in love with teaching, especially during Thami and Bongani's lesson on like the history of South Africa that they capsized like so beautifully. Literally came alive. I learned more than I'd ever learned in like my entire high school career of doing history, and I'd been doing it for like 3 years up to that point. So it was taking that learning process, getting to apply it, getting to dress myself as a Winnie Madikizela Mandela, as a Nelson Mandela, and trying to see, okay, cool, this is what I think about this. This is what I think we should do, but also being given the opportunity to be taken seriously to do that. I think that was a really, really important thing that happened in debating. The transformativeness for me came from the fact that we were taken seriously with what we were doing. And so, that's a little bit of my journey.
Yeah, I want to hop on that one, right? When you speak about debate for transformation, because I think that's a very good segue to the next discussion point, which is debating for change. Busi and I are not interested in debate for competition. It has its value, we have Tshimong League, it's huge, we're doing all that stuff, right? It's important for the fundamentals. There's specific ingredients that it engenders. It's good. But what we care about is debating for social change and transformation. So talk to me about when that epiphany happened and what was the subsequent intervention on your side and how did it manifest in every other area of your life? And then I think Ste will also, just literally immediately take from Munaka. So yeah, without us in between.
Okay, cool. So I think for me, that epiphany is literally culminating now with Tshimong Academy, right? So like I said, I leave the debating space in my matric and I realize there's huge benefits that I've literally gotten straight from debating. There's too much of a strong correlation between how you perform and how well you adapt and the type of leader and student you are and how great your performance is as a student with debating for us to ignore. So that correlation is extremely strong. But I think people can't delve into it in a meaningful way outside of it just gave you confidence and critical thinking skills. And so I myself was not able to articulate and delve into that properly. I had to get to university, right? And quickly pick up during the pandemic when I started talking to Busi and quickly pick up that the reason that we're performing that way or the reason why there's a strong correlation with great student performance and debating is not coincidence or you just have inherent smarts. Is because debating literally becomes a tool that is transformative enough to start embedding those skills into you and allowing you to put them into practice. Yeah. Right? And that process that goes into it is absolutely true to say that someone can stand up and have the confidence to say a speech, but I think that's a half narrative. The full narrative is that there's a competence that accompanies that confidence, and that competence has been developed in me all of this time. But now I'm realizing I don't like competitive debating. I don't want to step back into the competitive debating space. How then do I leverage this? And I think for me, the epiphany comes with what education is supposed to be doing and why it's strongly correlated to success and why it's strongly correlated to nation building. I think then that makes me realize that debating should not be a niche. It should be an imperative of education. Because out of that kind of, and Busi is like, yeah, but out of that kind of comes this realization very quickly that the strong correlation and skills that are being built and developed in us are being put into practice because we're given those opportunities to do so, right? So my epiphany literally comes to me, I think, in a conversation with Busi when she says, if this was in classrooms, imagine what could happen. So now I'm like, there are people out there that were literally asking me all of the time, how do you do all of this? How do you balance all of it? And I was not balancing anything. I was just immersing myself in a process that had already been imbued and taught to me, right? And because I was taught, I think that's the most important thing that I take away from it, that it's something that is taught. It's something that can be taught, and it is a skill that you then extract from the process, right? Because a lot of us go to schools that promise holistic development and leadership and 21st century thinking skills. And we leave and, you can't apply it, you can't practice it, you can't prove what you really have been taught outside.
Those words are expensive.
Exactly. Extremely expensive. And people don't have budgets. But we'll beef another day. I think for now, right, the most important thing that came from my epiphany is culminating in Tshimong Academy, where I'm literally realizing that in a country where we don't want the huge disparity that you're seeing all of the time. If there's such an important tool that is so correlated to student success and it is distinguishing students, it is building leaders, it is creating your Stembisos that are now in medicine, your Munakas that get to be Jake's Harvard candidate fellows, if that thing exists, right, then it definitely should not be a niche that's reserved for intellect or for people that are interested in debating. It's an impact activity that needs to be imparted to every single student out there, right? Because it makes it possible to bridge that gap. So it's definitely not supposed to be a niche. And then I begin to realize that in a country with so much disparity, debating becomes the closest form of education that can be democratically dispensed. So that was my huge, my huge epiphany, and it is culminating now as I work on Tshimong Academy and work with Busi and work with Tshimong Academy. So it's stuff that I'm really excited to see. I'm living out something that I literally learned probably or something that I was able to articulate possibly only in 2020. So that's where the transformativeness comes from.
Busi, just give
After that
Yeah,
third speech,
Too much. Nah,
this guy's
man.
asking me for a reply.
Man, that's the whip speech, dude. You know when someone speaks like that in a debate, now you must respond to them. You already know you've lost, bruh. Why must I respond now? But anyway, what I was saying, I think it will be very important, Busi, quickly before Stembiso jumps in, because man, this is such an important question.
Yeah.
Talk about Tshimong Academy. Just plug that in for a second. What is that thing?
Man, this progression of thoughts, Munaka, the flow, This same thing happened to us. So here's what happened to us. Initially, we would just say, we take issue with the fact that there is no platform that is genuinely taking youth voice seriously. That's not pop culture. It's not there. We have seen it all as well, because we've had the opportunity to do a number of leadership activities in our lives. We've gone to ambassadorial dinners and engagements with the president, whatever. The youth voice is almost always tokenized.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that when young people don't show up at the polls to vote, people assume it's because young people don't have anything to say via their vote. But it's like, well, if pop culture is the only space that takes a youth voice seriously, then obviously when it's time for the manifestation of that, which will usually be the election, you're going to be punished by a youth that's apathetic to the system. At some point though, we were running this specific engagement that was looking at Chris Hani. And like you said, Munaka, Thami and Boani, these are history teachers. I'm a sarcasm teacher, wit teacher. But these guys, they would deliver history lessons. And at that tournament, we saw some of the best argumentative writing and argumentation on South African history, some of the most sophisticated understanding of events like Codesa. We were like, did we just deliver teaching better than it is done in a history lesson and in a way that got a room of 100 kids who absolutely came from disadvantaged low-income schools to literally excel. Many of them probably at an exercise they think they hate. And so an epiphany immediately came onto us to say, this is very important in terms of the speaking and the confidence that Munaka speaks about, and the platform and the articulation and active citizenry. But this is far more important because it's building competence, and that's what a confident speaker is able to demonstrate. Yes. And it's building that competence much better than school is able to. Because when we were taking a closer examination, particularly at one of our first ABSA tournaments, our winners, and if you're winning a Tshimong tournament, you're really stunning as a speaker. These guys are amazing and won a very tough final. They won scholarships for varsity. It was time to apply. We realized none of them qualified for varsity. And yet all 5 of them on paper were good enough for ABSA to say, I'm going to sponsor your education. So we had to take this interrogation even more serious, because how is it possible that this person's report card says they are not good enough for university, but they in 7 minutes articulated things that make them good enough for a boardroom? And there's a mismatch that is very clear that happens in education. Firstly, in how we define what education must do, but secondly, in how we teach the most fundamental traits of an educated mind, which is the ability to think. And importantly, how we measure competence and how we demonstrate it. And so that mishandling of those very crucial elements mean that thousands of kids are leaving school just simply being incapable of much in the economy, let alone of citizenship. And so that's why we decided to open the Tshimong Academy, because we said there's something in our process that's building competence, that's teachable, and that we want to package as an education product, not only to complement what must happen in mainstream education, but to teach mainstream education. So this is the academy that Munaka speaks about, right? And the things that we talk about 70% of the time, when we're not joking around about how crazy life is. This is 70%, and so that's the exciting thing, that's the future of all of this. But there's something important that you said, and I wonder if Tay can include some of this analysis in his response. You talk about that debating seems so stressful, right? Debaters then lose the essence of it, right? Because they're stressed, like it doesn't sound good. And you saying at some point you realized it shouldn't be about this technical know-how and the stress that comes with it, but rather this, what am I becoming? What opportunity am I getting? And I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, that's exactly what we need to say to people when they do the leak this year. It says, well, we're not interested in a technical 5 minutes of saying things the way that someone said them in a world's video that you watched. We're interested in you developing the ability to know things and to test things before you say them, so you can be confident when you say them. What would you say about that, and linking that just broadly into the change debating, and how that's kind of been an impetus in your life?
Yeah, I think that idea is kind of what started happening towards the end of like high school debating for me. And I think many of the people who I had as coaches then, people who I had as like judges, had a problem that I was not saying, you know, this is my burden of proof, or, you know, here's this argument. I would literally go, this is what we need to prove to you. And, you know, here's the logic, here's the important thing that we need to know. And I think, again, the reason why Tshimong becomes valuable in that case is ideas are more important than how you package them. Like, it's not about making sure that you have the right heading or you're using the right English or whatever. It's making sure that the ideas are valuable. And that's why I enjoy working in the space of Tshimong. So for me, before having any interaction with Tshimong, I was very arrogant in high school. I think I was one of those people who was good and knew that they were good. So I carried myself in that way a lot of the time. I remember I think I showed up late to Nelson Mandela debating challenge. I was slightly late by a full day. And when I got there, I think...
Just say why you were late there. Because that's also like, yeah, but I'm late for this reason.
Thami's going to torment you today.
Come on, man. This is why I'm late. Yeah, just say why you late.
Yeah, for me, it was one of those cases where it's like, okay, I'm at like essay training, you know, so I need to be at essay training, and that's it. This is probably one of those other tournaments I'm going to show up to, do good, and leave, whatever. So then I get there, and okay, granted, I did win the tournament, but still, not the point. So I get there, and first thing, we were playing this game, I think when I got there late at night, and then automatically before like you even introduce yourself to anyone, Busi just knew everyone's names. Like, she would just look at someone's face and be like, okay, this is yours. And I was like, okay, this is wild. This is cool.
Who are you?
Yeah. And then next day, that morning, I think we had a conversation about peace versus justice. And I was still very much in that debater mentality of like, you know, there's one way of thinking. So when that comparative came up, I was like, yeah, even if it means that, you know, a few hundreds or thousands of people would have died if we didn't go for peace, we must fight for what's right. It must be justice. And it sounds really cool when you say it, And then Busi responded and she was like, yeah, you're saying that because you don't actually have to make that comparative. You don't actually have to sacrifice those lives. And that's when, for me, it started like, okay, yeah, maybe the way that we're thinking about this is detached from reality. It's heavily detached. And the process got, as the tournament progressed, that process became a lot more clearer to me. I remember I was so incredibly tired when Thami gave the lecture about South Africa from 1992. I think the early 2000s. Incredibly tired.
Yeah.
I really just wanted to sleep. And then at some point in time, I think it was from 1994 onwards when he started talking about RDP. I don't know what happened. I just woke up. I woke all the way up. I was listening. He was running over time, so we had to stop. Then I kept hounding him to finish the conversation, at least with us. The tournament finished. Even afterwards, when we were eating, I was still hounding him like, yo, please finish what you had to say. Even till today, I don't know how the lecture was meant to finish. But yeah, it was that kind of experience. Because when you look at competitive debating, it's very much centered on, what's happening internationally? What's happening with your United Nations, your European Union? It's never what's happening here and what needs to happen in South Africa. And when I heard that, for me, it was like, okay, there's serious conversations that we need to be paying attention to here. And transitioning from that, it was incredibly difficult going back to competitive debating or normal competitive debating after that, because I would see myself losing debates that, logically, like I can't be losing. I went to Worlds and we had a debate about, payday loans. And as someone who comes from a Black family in South Africa, like how the loan works and how it impacts your family and how it impacts your community. So I remember talking to my team and talking to everyone. I'm like, I'm not interested in making fire arguments or things that sound fun. Let's just be as real as humanly possible. Went in, we did that. We lost to a European team that said poor people are irrational and they spend the money on things that they don't even need. They're going to spend it on gold chains, on whatever. And I remember after that debate, I cried. I cried after that debate. I called Bettina. I was like, I'm done with debating. I'm done with this. I don't want to do this. This makes absolutely no sense to me. And for all of 2020, I didn't do competitive debating at all because I felt like as young people and in the debating space as well, we're moving to a situation where everything is intellectualized. Everything is highly divorced from reality. We're amazing social justice warriors on Instagram, but we don't know what's going on here. We don't know what's going on in front of us. And that became like that's a massive issue. And where I differ from, I think, the rest of you guys is I started understanding the value of competitive debating after I had like a good 365 days to marinate on the past 4 years. And it was, you're not losing debates because you're like, your ideas suck. Sometimes it's a matter of you have to be able to communicate them well. You have to be able to understand the mini mechanics behind the counteracting ideas. And there's no better place to get that than in the debating space. So it is not to say that the idea that poor people are irrational is inherently more superior than mine, but I need to do the work of being able to dismantle that logic of poor people are irrational. And that becomes important when we're looking at real world scenarios, because we're fighting it's a very polarized political system right now. It's either you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and it always stays that way because either side is always making fun of each other. Neither side is willing to be charitable, willing to break down the logic of the other team or the other group of people. And you are only forced to do that when you are in that competitive space. If you don't listen to your competitor, you're going to lose. You're going to. You shouldn't and even as a marginalized person, that's not a W card. You are not going to win a debate about Black people just because you are Black. You are in real life, that's not going to happen either. I never get opportunities because I'm inherently a Black person. I always have to go, how do I leverage this? How do I explain myself? How do I do X, Y, and Z?
Facts.
So the value of that competitive space is you have to be self-conscious and you have to be conscious of the people around you to provide value. And I think that for me has been the kind of transformative experience I've had with Tshimong. Yeah.
So we still don't have a buzzer? And this is exactly why we speak about why you can't decouple education from active citizenship. And that the 21st century is actually an opportune time because the same set of competencies required for citizenship are also the same ones needed for career. Because 40 years ago, we didn't want you to be critical in the workplace. It wasn't required for any technical ability that helped a company turn its profit. But now we need you to be. We need you to be collaborative. We need you to be interdisciplinary, all of which are concepts that we also need you to understand and to value if you're going to be an awesome citizen. And this is the value of both of these perspectives coming through in this talk. Interestingly, Thami, because we didn't even plan for kind of this to work out the way it's working out right now. But what you're saying is incredibly important, is that marginalized people, and I say this to my students, I say to them, if Mmusi Maimane, Julius Malema, and President Ramaphosa walk in and each of them have a room and they have 20 minutes and they're out of here, and you can choose which room to go into. Which room are you going into? Usually it's not because of the ideas or even the biases that we hold about what we think ought to be done. Most of us are going to go into a room that is a compelling speaker. And so ultimately, what we need to understand is that it's not just going to be ideas that we believe are right, that we believe are moral, that we believe are progressive. It's also going to be about the packaging of those ideas, because that ultimately has the potential to undo all of the work that's been done to help people develop ideas and to develop community. So how we engage is probably going to be the most important political tool in the coming century. And on that specifically, we want to talk about voting. We're going into the 2024 election, and this is in fact our last question to you guys. I know there's audience members right now who are knocking on imaginary desks, hearing. Throw your questions in the chats. I will, Thami's going to look out for those questions. We're definitely going to ask those questions before we run out of time. But very quickly, how has debating empowered you to exercise your right to vote? And specifically going into this 2024 election, where we know 2/3 of young people don't vote. Firstly, how does debating become important in changing those numbers and turning them on their head? But how are you going to be reading a manifesto? What are you going to be looking for? What do you think youth are going to be looking for, specifically a first-time voter going into those polls? What's some of your analysis around that?
Anyone can answer.
Me personally, I was going to hand it over to, the founder of Listen, Interrogate, Transform. I personally think he should take this one, but I'm cool with going first. I think for me, right, the really important thing about what you said, Busi, is that you can't decouple education and citizenry, or active and successful citizenry for me, is that, it has become a context-giving tool. Debating has become a context-giving tool for me, in that I don't just end a debate and then I walk away. I'm like, cool, won, lost, whatever. I'm now able to listen and interrogate to some of those ideas in a way that is meaningful to me personally, because I have those conversations with my friends and I think they're important enough, right? The other thing that I think debating does is that it does not allow you the opportunity to be apathetic, which is a huge problem we have right now in our country. We have with the youth, is that we're delved into such a deep pit of disillusionment and cynicism And popular culture doesn't help at all with that. Like the Twitter space doesn't help, and it's just like, whatever, let's all die. Because realistically, it's like, we're alive. We are going to be alive for a very long time. We're going to work here, live here, parent here. We're going to build here. And that's important. And in understanding that, right, I think debating has kind of just given me the context and the opportunity and the platform to unpack some of the ideas that I have that are problematic, but also, like Stembiso said, to engage logically with someone else's ideas in terms of what they're thinking and what they understand about the political environment. Now, translating that into being empowered enough to be a voter or an active citizen and understanding the political space just means that I take the time to simply say that I am not going to read a manifesto and go with the glib expression of we are going to guarantee free education or employment, because those promises have been made before. I'm 27 years into a democracy where we have not lived up to the potential that I know this country has. So I'm looking for a party whose potential does not lie in promises, but lies in proof. That for me is the most important part. I think before you deal with all the resources, before you deal with all the important, like really important strategic things that need to be done in order for governance to be successful, do not leapfrog the process that is happening in our country, which is that there's a metaphysical flaw of understanding about why politics are important to begin with. They have been intellectualized, they have been gamified and tokenized to the extent that they seem so far removed from reality that it's like, it's this thing where if you can talk or if you have money or if you can do this, that's the only time you're allowed to participate in politics. You're participating in politics with the sort of discussions that you have with your friends. You're participating in politics with the sort of decisions you empower one another to make when it comes voting day or when it comes voting time next year.
Sure.
So that is what debating has done for me, is that it has given me a community of people that I'm able to share these ideas with, but it's also given me access to the kind of people that are allowed to change my mind and whose minds I'm allowed to change. It's a very crucial and formative space to be in, especially when you're this young. Because what I've realized about politics, about debating, about anything in life, in fact, is that just because something is crucial and formative and you decide to be, or not even decide to be, because technically there's a lot going wrong in our country, but you're disillusioned or you're unresponsive to that, it doesn't stop being any less crucial and formative, right? And so you owe it to yourself to immerse yourself in that process. Debating has taught me to do that in an applicable way, because literally when you have to pay attention. But taking out from that is just the people and networks of people that I get to engage with that just allow me to have the important conversations to change my mind, and also just have empowered me with the skills and the mindset and perspective to be like, this is my country and I exist here. I want to see this transformation. I know this transformation is possible. I know there's potential. I know there's people to hold accountable, and I know there's change that I can leverage and contribute to. And then that's the best way I can package what I've gotten from debating and how it has empowered me to be an active citizen.
Amazing, dude. Sure. I'm not even gonna add commentary because we don't finish when we add commentary. So what would you say?
I think for me, first thing that's important is to be aware of what politics can and cannot do. So I think a lot of the times we're like, here are all of my problems. There's meant to be a politician that's in charge of fixing X, Y, and Z. So take some time to thoroughly do the research of what are the mandates of your government and how does that come into play when it comes to my own personal life. And I think the next three things, which I discussed a little bit when I did an episode of my podcast that was about the municipal elections last year, is it's never exclusively I'm an EFF gent, so I'm going to vote for the EFF all the time. It's a matter of what elections am I voting in, what are they going to decide, and who are the best people for that.
There you go.
So whether or not you're an EFF gent, if you're voting in the municipal elections and your current conversation is about, we don't have water, we don't have good delivery, or whatever the case may be, find out which party does that best in comparison to the others, and then vote for them. It's about knowing that mandate. That's the first thing. Secondly, and most importantly, it's knowing, it's voting for people who have a plan. Like the problem with politics right now, not even just in South Africa, everywhere, everyone wants to scream good ideas. Everyone wants to scream, free education, whatever, end of poverty. But without a plan, that means absolutely nothing. So read that manifesto, look for those plans, look at which plan makes the most amount of sense for you, your people, your community, and obviously the country. And I think thirdly, it is a matter of past track record. So we make this mistake so many times when it gets to election time. The campaigns are so incredibly persuasive. Like I watch some of the ANC ads sometimes and I'm like, yo, they really like put their foot out with this one, Sometimes, we tend to forget that, okay, here's what's happened in the past. Here's, so we really need to do a lot of that work of understanding what people's track records are. Where debating becomes important there is the one word every debate coach forces their children to use: comparative. Got to be able to compare between the different parties, what is important, who's achieving more in what space. And nothing teaches you to do that better than debating, because that is actively competitive and actively comparative. And I think for me, that's really the value. And it's something that needs to be taught outside of just our activity or our extracurricular activity. Children need to be taught how to make comparisons that are not counter considerations. And what a lot of, and again, this is going to link to something that was already spoken about before in terms of how are you balancing all of this? People don't realize how valuable debating is to just about everything else that you do in life. If you want to talk about education and how good you do in your history essays, for example. There have times where I've walked into a history essay and winged it entirely because I knew this is how I handle this comparative. This is how I manipulate this information. So highly translatable skill. Even with maths, you look at your logic that you learn from debating and you're like, something here it's not logicking the way it's meant to logic.
It's not logicking. Thami, you must admit that debate practice.
The combos are not communicating. That's
fine. Really, and I've learned this in IT as well.
That's amazing. Thami, I think we wanted to check if our guests have questions for us.
Nothing so far, but I think what I'll do in the meantime is two things. I think one is kind of hop on to what Munaka and Stembiso has been saying.
But Thami, that's not the question the guest has for you.
Oh.
He forgot that you guys are guests, by the way, Munaka said.
Well, because we have one conversation.
We're basically, we're having a full-on conversation.
All of these
it's not even an interview
people.
anymore.
Like, no one is a guest here. We're at home. You know that thing, you go into someone's house and they're like, aren't you gonna make me food? They're like, bruh, you home. Make your own food. So, yeah. I don't know, guys. I think from our side, we've been asking a lot of the questions, and the audience has been given an opportunity to get to know you so much more. I think as alumni of Tshimong programs, and as people that have found themselves working within the Tshimong space right now, what questions may you have to either Busi and I? And also, this is a nice segue for audiences as well. If you have a question for any of us, the four of us, and there's a question from Olwe too, which we will answer a little bit later.
Cool. Do I go first? Or just
Anyone.
Okay.
Maybe you should. Shame.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I have a question for Busi. To be honest, I have many questions for you, but I have one specific one for this. For me personally, I think that I stopped being able to do a lot of community outreach work and doing a lot of the work that I started in 2018, because I felt as if at some point in time, you kind of have to make a trade-off between giving to the community as well as giving to yourself, giving to your family, and still being able to be a healthy person. And it does get difficult sometimes. So, and it's something that I'm still trying to figure out. I still don't know how to do it properly. So from you, how do you create that balance of, I am an adult and I need to eat as a person, I have a family to take care of, I have things to do, as well as let me give to the community and let me invest in youth empowerment? Where do you draw that line, and how do you balance that yourself?
I love that question.
Personally,
I think
I remember I saw you at NMDC. You were doing so much, pushing around a pregnant belly, running.
Yeah,
I love that question so much, as I think it captures the essence of why we lose so many dynamic, intelligent, powerful youth to corporate and to mainstreaming, which is not a huge problem in and of itself, because somebody's got to work in these spaces. But the contradiction of life is that we need the most talented people solving our problems, but they're being paid to solve problems that are not as important, and it's just difficult to match the value they can gain from that. So a lot of dynamic young people are sitting with the question about what the best use of their time is. But maybe to speak specifically to self-sacrifice, and I think activism is also part of generosity here, because when you're giving up time to dismantle ideas and to fight systems, that's also taking a toll. That's a service to a community, and that's perhaps one of the most powerful incidents in my life that I recall that put the question of sacrifice front and center for me. I was an activist at UCT during Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, and I was suspended in my final year in 2016, right towards the end of my degree. I probably had 4 courses left, and before then I was doing some program called South Africa Washington International Program, probably the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life, but that I couldn't fully come into because I knew that I'm going to be suspended. And leaving after then, of course, there's a lot of anger and there's this and that, but probably 8 months into that season in my life, I had to really sit down and think about what are the most strategic ways that I'm going to serve that are not going to harm me, because those things should actually not be one or the other, which is how they usually operate right now and why we feel like we have to make a trade-off. So it set me in motion in the sense that I'm always going to serve, but I'm always going to serve strategically. That requires me to take inventory of what my strengths are, what my assets are, what my networks and resources look like. Therefore, how can I serve? Where am I best placed, and where should I step back for someone else to do that work? And I'm constantly checking inventory throughout as I move along. And even in the work that I do that's deeply developmental, I wouldn't do it if I hadn't spent the time investing in it enough that it has output that makes sense for what I'm putting in.
100%.
So the trade-off has to become more things like, for instance, if it was up to me, I'd spend 100% of my time in Orange Farm, in Alex, in Deep Blue teaching. But I end up spending 30% of my time doing that, because there's a time I'm raising funding, I'm writing proposals, I'm meeting people, I'm putting myself in positions where I can speak and be selected for lists and all this stuff. So that's the strategic part, right? So one must not neglect their calling, I guess is my point, and the importance of their service and how their service has helped elevate and uplift, and my service has certainly done that. But one must also be mindful that that sacrifice must be strategic, or else it's going to come at a personal cost, even to one's health, which is then pointless, because we need you to be healthy and happy and fulfilled to serve. So in a nutshell, I'll stop there, but I know we're going to hang out soon, so I'll get a bit more into it. But in a nutshell, maybe that's useful.
But if I were to add there, we see, it's really, it's management of time and resources, and respecting the fact that both time and resources are limited. You know, and so how do you consistently move around time and resources such that you can sustain the impact? Because the impact is also limited. Impact is finite, unless you back it with resources.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? And so it's almost like, how can you turn your calling into a vocation? And not all of us are privileged to plug ourselves into large organizations that have already answered that question for us. And that may not be the passage of our lives, but you know, we may have to be the ones that would have to build that from scratch. But it's that consistent conversations about time, resources, impact. Right? And every aspect of it has an ROI.
And it's okay when you don't have an answer to give yourself a break and to decide, I'm going to fall in line under a more experienced founder or organization who's going to guide me. So I don't know exactly how to navigate this aspect of my life at this point. So, you know, last year at some point when we were sitting with like a lot of thinking that we had to do in Tshimong, not so much actioneering, which tends to be our favorite thing to do, I completely gave both myself and Thami permission that if we want a break and we want to go work somewhere else, and we're going to come back into Tshimong later when we figured things out, give yourself that permission. Also, I think young people will need to understand we're playing a long game. But maybe just also a specific response, you know, someone like you, who you're very accomplished and there's lots of things that you can do for your time that are competing for your time. And maybe one of the important things that you must not neglect, for example, is just the brilliant things that you said today that can only be dispensed with in that particular debating environment, hate it or love it, right? And so there's things sometimes that we also, like one thing we could do is find the biggest platform to serve sometimes, because then the impact is on a multiplier level. So convene a tournament that's going to reach 2,000 kids and 200 volunteers, and maybe don't mentor a smaller school, rather get someone else in the pipeline to do that. So it's also about thinking strategically about the platforms where we're going to serve, so we can maximize on the impact and get a bigger return for each hour we spend putting in some of that talent and resource and energy. Munaka, you have a question for Thami.
Yeah.
Importantly, where is it placed?
Very, very, very big question. It's an entity with 3 areas of impact. And right now, it is a microcosm of that. The first area of impact is in education. So the one thing that we're very interested in, as you know very much, Munaka, is creating a basic education pedagogy that is interested in teaching and assessing critical competencies. And we want to create a model that can be ubiquitous and can be applied across all curriculums, right? So what kind of tools can we develop right now that can be licensed and plugged into different education spaces and systems? Can we toy around with the idea even building our own school? We've already had a very serious conversation about that between Busi and I, right? How can we thoroughly plug ourselves into the education space? Because we believe we know the deficits, and we have a very specific perspective on what education needs to look like on the African continent. And we believe that we can position ourselves through all the work that we've done over the years to do so. I think secondly, is in the civic discursive space, right? How can we, for example, turn the number around, ratio around of the number of young people voting from 30% to 70%? What are we doing in terms of facilitating conversations in communities and facilitating conversations in schools to get young people to a place where they view themselves as political agents, and they thus engage in the spectrum of democracy and not just voting in general, right? So this is a lot of the work that Tshimong Foundation will be doing and has begun thinking about as well. And then thirdly, it's in the media space, right? Because we believe that that is a very serious, important area of impact. Because you can't talk about educating people en masse or engendering a culture of nation building and reconciliation without the use of broadcast media. The broadcast media that is traditional and the digital media that we are on right now. This is, for example, the kind of thing that we want to be doing at a serious scale by then, right? When I was a child, half of the stuff that I understood about the HIV and AIDS virus and pandemic at the time, I learned on TV. And that process of destigmatization happened more on TV than it did in the classroom environment alone. Media is powerful. So how can we create, produce, and distribute media that can change lives, the minds, transform the minds of people, right? And so this manifests itself in different kind of organizations. So it's not just Tshimong, but Tshimong is the umbrella. It's or as it is understood right now, it is the plowing ground from which these things grow. So that's the vision. That's the vision. So it's a long game. It's not like things are perfect right now, but it's really taking on the mantle right now with very few resources, but with strategic partnerships. I mean, you come to the University of Johannesburg, for example, with their tens of thousands of students and their platform and you leverage their legitimacy to be able to do the work that you're doing in the media space. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about right now at this stage of the game, to get us to a place where we are hegemonic enough to determine these things ourselves. And 2030 is what that would look like. But thank you very much for that question. Like it's but like just before I jump onto the audience questions there, all of this is a nation building imperative for us. For us, this is deeply political. It's yes, it's competitive. Yes, there's a market factor of when it comes to it, but all of this is about how can we make this continent actualize, and how can we tap into the African century, and what are we doing to get to that place. And we believe that we have the tools that, if applied at scale, could really be crucial to the things that we want to see in the future. So Brilliant. Thank you very much for that question. I think let me jump onto the audience questions real quick. The first question that I have from Olwe to Mangaile, it goes to both Munaka and Robert. Books that Munaka and Robert would recommend. So what should the kids be reading?
Me personally, South African poets.
Yeah.
So your Lebo Mashiles, your Koleka Putumas, read poetry. But I'm assuming this person was asking under the guise of like what books were really fundamental that like shifted my mindset or opened up some perspective. I think for me, anything in South African fiction was super important. But like I said, I was a teacher's baby. So I was hounding my teachers on just, understanding the book better, understanding the characters. But we have a literary source of power in our country. So pick up a South African fiction book, and they are often on sale sometimes. So yeah, that's me. That's what would you read? Definitely South African books, poetry, but yeah, South African fiction is also really good.
Stembiso?
I'm going to give a long-winded answer that will most likely not do much for answering the question, but I must. I'm not going to lie, I'm not a massive reader when it comes to politics specifically. I think a lot of the books I read are about very personal type situations and very specific things. And the reason for that, and the reason why I have to make mention of it, is because a lot of the times we kind of separate interpersonal relationships from politics, and that makes it kind of difficult to make that way up on your own and like figure out how the two should be interacting. So I would read a book like The Picture of Dorian Gray, book about like a white man who does a lot of horrible things and starts getting worse as time goes on. That book, again, very entertaining, has a very valuable lesson about toxic masculinity for you to learn. And a lesson about how men should behave around each other and towards women. So I think for me, it's not necessarily, or again, this is why I'm saying I'm not answering the question. It's not about what you decide to read, but it's about what you decide to take away from what you read. So read whatever you enjoy, but make sure that you're doing so constructively. I think for me, a lot of the knowledge that I have as well, and I always like harping on about this, it's speak to older people. Older people are older because they know more in a lot of cases, and for example, every month I have, we call it a monthly men's conference. I call Ubongani and we just speak about life, the most random stuff ever. And I walk away with so much information about how to handle myself, about how to do better as a male, about what mistakes I should avoid that he might have had in his life. So I think, that's it for me. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's get to our next question. This
I think it's
is from
Letabo.
Letabo. Yes. Letabo asks, how does one communicate their ideas better than others? Because sometimes I have the best ideas, I notice this in my essays, but I cannot let them out as they should be. So what do I do, besides writing them? So anyone can answer this question. So maybe Munaka, especially from a teacher's perspective,
Yeah, I was actually about to just say, as a future English and history teacher, for me, right? And let me get personal with it. I was like just inherently good at writing. I believe that writing and like speaking is my calling, but I got to a point I was shy about it. And like Stembiso said, right, sometimes you really have excellent ideas. You're not this mega confusing genius. You just need to articulate them better. And there's no other thing. It's going to sound so corny, but literally practice. Practice is going to make perfect. As someone who still struggles to articulate my ideas sometimes, or struggles to articulate them with the clarity that I envision them, I journal every day, almost every day. So journaling is really important. This is not just for bettering your essays and your academics. It's just going to help you foreground your own story, being able to articulate it for yourself, to the people around you, but also just leveraging from that a lot of the ideas that you come up with that can be turned into something. So like Thami said, sometimes your calling could become a vocation. If you're writing that out every day and then you have to explain it to someone, you know it well enough that it's not, it's not tripping you up. But literally just practice. And that practice doesn't have to be your academic essays. I recommend journaling to everyone. Therapy is expensive in this country. It's also a good therapeutic tool. So just journal. If it's in your memo pad or the notepad in your phone, do that and dedicate at least like 30 minutes of your day to that. But in terms of also struggling to articulate ideas, I think if you are someone who has the capacity to do so, look up people that have similar ideas to you, because chances are someone has thought of what you are thinking and can articulate it better, or rather can even address it better and prompt more thoughts from your side. So tune yourself into Tshimong talks and podcasts, and tune yourself into speakers that you find impactful and people that you agree with. Tune in also to Stembiso's podcast. What is it called? After Freedom. That's what's up. Plug right there. But yeah, I think that's just how you get better at articulating ideas and better at writing. Just practice. You will get there.
Oh, and I think for me, just to hop on to what she's already said, all throughout high school, the person I used to speak with, Siam Jali, very brilliant thinker. I think, at least in my opinion, probably even smarter than me with some of his ideas. And what kind of made the dynamic work very well is, even though he was a brilliant thinker, he couldn't really translate it to a practical level a lot of the times. So I had to kind of assist with that a lot. So what really helps in those situations is appealing to what people already know. So taking your idea, breaking it down to a level to a point that people already understand. So, for example, if you're, I don't know, maybe talking about the state of politics in South Africa, speak about how, there's a lot of corruption going on, but also bring it down to, that's why you don't have electricity from 8 to 10, just breaking it down there.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Let me read out, because Oluti also asked another question, but because we're running out of time, unfortunately, all the way too. But what I will do is that I will go to Mrs. Pilay's question. Is that Mrs. Monoshni Pillay? Is that her? It's probably her. Hi, Thami, Busi, Rob, and Munaka. I would like to get more schools in the province to include debating as part of the curriculum. However, the challenge is that educators do not feel equipped to handle this. Is there any tool, videos, or document that any new teacher can use that can equip them in the knowledge and skills to embrace debating in their schools? Busi, maybe you can answer that one.
I love that question, because that's exactly what we're trying to do, Mrs. Pillay. We're trying to build a package that has in it a structure and tools so that any teacher can use this in class. And we think there's very specific benefits that can come of it over and above the competencies. Many of our teachers are sitting with very big groups of learners.
Yeah.
And we believe that it's quite difficult to know where your learners are and how they're progressing, and to also encourage them to open their textbooks and to do additional reading. So debating becomes a very important tool, because if you end your weekly plan covering a section in a specifically drawn out debating process with tools that can adequately tell you where your learners are, that can incentivize those that comprehend the knowledge to even take further steps and to conduct additional research on what they're learning. And that's where we begin to see the thinking happening. Unfortunately, we're not completely done. We're actually going to be doing a pilot with the Department of Basic Education in Term 3. But I'll keep you in the loop, because that's exactly our vision, is to see this in classrooms, in every single classroom in the country.
All right. I think, just given time, we see perhaps we can get maybe concluding remarks from our guests, from Munaka and from Stembiso. Maybe let's start with you, Stembiso.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you to you guys for creating this platform. I enjoyed this conversation, wouldn't have spent the past hour or so doing anything else. But also I just want to stress how important it is for us to view this activity of debating as more than just debating or all of the connotations around it, and view it as 21st century thinking and what's needed to progress. So I hope that's what everyone who's listening to this takes away from the conversation.
100% amazing. Munaka?
I think for me specifically, just main takeaways. Once again, like Rob, super grateful for the platform. But what I'm most grateful for are the people that are going to watch the conversation, and hopefully that the main takeaway they get from it is that life is not a YOLO thing. Please, we've recently come to this realization with my friends that life is not a YOLO thing. Each and every single thing that we do, think, say, participate in is deep, and it's supposed to be deep for a reason. It's meaningful. Life in and of itself is a gift. And debating is one of those many ways that you get to tap into your own gifts. So debating doesn't always look like standing up and giving a third speaker speech or second speaker speech. I believe that the confidence that you get from debating is followed by a competence that can be applied any and everywhere else. And I'm not even in the competitive debating space anymore, so I can definitely verify that this is true. So yeah, just I hope that a main takeaway is that have those important and difficult conversations with yourself, with your friends. Journal every day. Read more poetry. Spread love. Life is not YOLO, but that's it from me. Thanks so much.
From my side, again, thank you very much, guys, for coming onto this platform. We really appreciate you guys. In a world where we don't actually have enough role models that can inspire young people to be productive and impactful, you guys are doing exactly that for your peers and those who are younger than you. And from our perspective, that's why we always think it's important to have young people on these kind of platforms. Isn't that what Youth Month is supposed to be about? It's supposed to be about once the baton has been passed down, like what are the people that have the baton right now doing with it, or that will have the baton doing with it? And you guys are really demonstrating at a large degree what that could look like. So thank you so much. I think as a parting shot to the audience, really, I think take the platform, take debating seriously. More seriously than it is being taken right now. Take it more seriously and see it as something that spreads outside of the competitive room, outside of the touch room, outside of the classroom, outside of that practice. Every time you get into that practice and every time you are simulating yourself as a governor, as an advocate, as whatever the debate requires you to do, just know that all of those seeds that are being sowed inside of you are going to blossom in a crazy way by the time you get into your adult life. It's not being done for nothing. Your life will change, but I think your main responsibility is to ensure that the lives of others change as a result of you engaging in this activity for as long as you have. So spread the gospel, and that's what we're here to do.
That's great. I think on that sweet note, that's exactly where we'll stop. No more thoughts are needed. That's special. Thank you again to Stembiso and Munaka. I can't stress enough that you represent an evolution in the life of a young organization who started with a simple hypothesis, and were it not for people like you proving that hypothesis to be true and also testing its limits and strengthening it where it's weak, this organization might not have existed today. So for us, we wanted to pay homage to the youth today and this month in general by just remembering the roots of why we're doing what we're doing, which is, dare I say, the mass production of future leaders.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely possible to do. Thank you so much to our partners, the University of Johannesburg, for this beautiful podcast studio that we are in and that we continue to record in. Thank you to all of our guests for joining in. We have a very loyal core that's always going to be in the calls, no matter when they get their invitation. And we can't wait for the next talk. Thank you so much, everyone. See you again soon. Bye.